Chapter 22. Faking Death. In February and on into March, I had the flu. I would get out of bed and have a back seat. Ethel was down too. I continued to cough and have sharp pains in my chest. Several times the doctor had come to the ranch to see about Ethel and me. She was losing weight and coughing and spitting blood. But at the time, half of the town was down with the flu. It was the year that the great epidemic of influenza swept across Texas. Many families lost loved ones, usually buried without benefit of a preacher to read scriptures over their graves. Usually someone in the family recited a passage, then the body was lowered into the clay. Some of our friends lost 2 members of their family at one time. Most everyone was afraid to attend the funerals. On a Saturday after Ussery came on Friday, he was working with Hoggett on a public road. He asked, "Cochrain, when are you leaving for New Mexico?" "On the 12th. Then you'd better go ahead and die with the flu here. At least you'll be buried near your family. I've met Baca. If you go back there, you won't return, so I don't speculate on it." His frankness unnerved me, but I knew he spoke the truth. Mrs. Cooper had put a $10,000 reward on my head, and that would buy any Mexican in New Mexico, lawman or citizen. I explained to Ussery about my bondsman. Said, "You know your dead man's bond if no longer binding." "But I'm not dead yet, Ussery." "Don't you see, Byrd? You can get the word out that you are dead, and the bondsman will be released, and you can hide for a few years. At least you'll be alive playing dead." "Yes, then stay out of this country and go out of New Mexico." For a while, the 3 of us stood around, plotting my death. We all began to weave a scheme for which I would eventually go to prison, but at the time it seemed the only way to live. I told Ethel that night about our plan. She became almost hysterical about it. She told me she would never have part in a plan of deception. The other 2 wives felt the same, but I continued to plan. Ethel, courageous but frail, was in no condition to care for the children. I could not leave them. This thought drove me on to a fake burial. Many times during the ordeal I remembered Mrs. Cooper's threats that she would see me burn in hell for what I had done for her family. Many times I asked myself why she had singled me out of all the others. I had bandaged her cut hands. I helped her son Harmon into the house. I stayed around for the law while the others had gone, and I had listened quite patiently to her abuse with a little comment was over about it. She was hired man to ride with Juan and Ambrosio for the sole purpose of making friends, then killing them when the opportunity presented itself. He became friends with my boys and betrayed Mrs. Cooper by taking them into his confidence. Hoggett and Ussery brought their wives to the house. We all sat and talked until late. Mrs. Ussery told me to do what I wanted, but she didn't want to be involved. Mrs. Hoggett told me that she felt it was the only way for me to stay alive. So Ussery and Hoggett began spreading the word that Byrd Cochrain was sinking fast. The next day by noon, Dr. Jordan called about Ethel. He couldn't come out, but sent medicine to his own ranch. He had too many sick people to handle for one man. This worked out better for me. He knew I had been ill off and on for some time. He had already advised Ethel and me to both needed a long rest. Late that night he came by. I complained about burning pains in my chest. He told me I'd had a hard case of the flu, and this was another back seat. About daylight the next morning, Ethel brought all the babies and put them in bed with me. When people came by, I pretended to be in stupor. Ethel was crying, and they thought she was upset over my condition. More rumors floated around that I was dying. I was not proud of this, but I had hopes of staying alive. During a heated argument over my act, Ethel accused me of being a coward. She blurted out that I was afraid of Baca. I told her I would face any man, but back-shooting was another matter. I should have faced Baca. Many nights and years hence I have regretted what I did. I regretted not listening to my wife's pleas, but the instinct to stay alive was driving me. Hoggett called Dr. Jordan and told him I had died during the night. The fact that Dr. Jordan had been working all day and night was in our favor. He had no reason to doubt but that I had died from some epidemic that was killing strong men and babes in arms. The weather was so cold and damp that only a few friends came by with food, and no offer to help with arrangements. I was laid on a cooling board and silver dollars placed over my eyes. I stayed there for 14 hours. As I lay, I heard many familiar voices expressing sympathy to Ethel. My dear old friend Pat Anderson was quite brokenly as he looked upon me. "You just don't look natural. Poor old Byrd. No one can take his place." Hoggett and Ussery placed me in the coffin and told a few people who they were they could handle things. My mother and father and family had been notified. We knew it was impossible for them to get to Asper in time for the funeral. Ussery sent word to the New Mexico authorities of my death, and T.T. Gwynn, sheriff of the county, received 2 telegrams later on asking if I were dead. Sheriff again answered the first one and said that I was dead according to all the information he could gather. Before he answered the second telegram, he sought additional information from Dr. Jordan, who told him Pat Anderson said I was dead. Pat had told him he saw me dead. Mr. Ginn remarked to the doctor that if Pat said I was dead, I was dead. His word was as good as anyone in these parts. The 2 of them went to see Pat, and he told them the same story. Then the sheriff wired the New Mexico authorities that I was dead. This occurred soon after my burial. Sheriff Ginn resigned from office some months later. Several of my friends helped dig my grave. When Ussery told A.L. Cope, my neighbor, of my death, Cope got together with some other men and went to Johnson County Cemetery where they dug the grave for me. He offered to go by my house, but Hoggett and Ussery kept declining such offers. Mr. Cope attended the funeral, as did Anderson, and they were all among the ones who helped lower my casket. And some of my friends asked if the coffin needed to be opened to let them have a last look. My wife told them that she wanted the children to remember me just as I was when I was alive. No one insisted, of course, and Ussery lost no time in trying to get rid of the handful of people who had come to my funeral. I'd put an inner tube inside the lining of my casket in case I needed it. The weather being so cold and damp, few words were said by Preacher Bauer, the Methodist preacher, and Hoggett and Ussery insisted the crowd go home. Brother Bowen and Pat Anderson were the 2 men who brought my casket out of the house for Hoggett and Ussery. After everyone was gone, the 2 men lost no time in getting me out of the coffin. Quickly, the 3 of us covered an empty box, and then I crawled back into the back of a wagon, and Ussery and Hoggett drove me to Jim Espinito's house. That was about 2 miles from my own ranch. I felt that Ethel would never see me again. I knew this had been about broken her heart. I could only try to make it up to her, and I could live in hiding for a while. But fate had other doors to shut in my face. I'd forgotten to tell Ethel about my insurance policies. When I discussed taking out a life policy, she had objected so strongly that I did it later without her knowledge. But well-meaning friends intervened. Ethel refused to see me when I went by the house that night after the burial. I stayed 2 more days with friend Jim. I went back over to the house once to try to see my boys. Then I went to another county, bought myself an old Ford car, disguised myself as best I could as a Mexican, and headed for Socorro to see my bondsmen. I kept worrying about them. I passed through Socorro and Magdalena and camped near the Correjo house. Next day I saw Juan and Amby as they were coming home. I had scrubbed the stove polish off my face and hands, but left my eyes shaded. I changed my clothes and headed for their house. Family was having supper. I could see them from the window. I could also see that if I entered the house from the south door, the 3 men would have their backs to me. The father of the little girl I had saved from the horse would be facing me as I came in. I sat down, pulled off my boots and coat and hat, and unbuckled my cartridge belt, and laid it on my hat brim to keep the wind from blowing it away. I stepped to the door and opened it slowly. After listening for a moment through the half-open door, I slipped into the room. I heard them discussing me. There I stood facing Fidel Armillo, who had started to sip his coffee and had about to his lips when he saw me. Down went the cup, and he gazed at me in wide-eyed astonishment. Quickly he crossed his breast. He pointed at me with one hand, half rising from his chair and keeping one hand on the table to help steady his shaking hand. "La murder! La murder!" he cried. The others looked around. The men jumped to their feet. The looks on their faces made me wonder if I shouldn't run and hide. The family just stared. Mrs. Armijo sat down, forgot to shut her mouth. Juanita clasped her hands to her bosom. She called my name. "Senor Cochrain, is it you?" "Yes, it is Byrd." I gently smiled at her. Fidel sank back into his chair and slapped his head on the back of his right hand. He was completely overcome. Amby stepped forward, grinning at me, and offered me his hand. "Cochrain, we thought you were a ghost." He laughed. "We got word you were dead, you know. Where are your wings, you old rascal?" Everybody began to laugh from the sheer relief to find that I was real. One sat back down and motioned me to a chair. He just looked at me. Juanita came to me from behind the table and gave me her hand. "Senor, I am glad you have come back to see us. I am too glad that you are not dead." And then there were lots of jabbering and laughing going on. Mrs. Armejo fixed me a plate of food. I ate and answered questions all at the same time. They told me how Baca had refused to accept Ussery's letter as my final word on my death, but they had been relieved of all responsibility towards the sheriff again, who wired that I was dead. I told them the only reason for returning was to make sure that Baca had not tried to hold them responsible for me. Then I had to tell them how I managed to fake a funeral. I told them Ethel was mad at me and wouldn't let me in the house. We sat up late that night and talked over past events and how Mrs. Cooper and her children had managed. She had sold her ranch and moved to Roswell. I went back to my camp that night and moved on by sunrise the next morning. I warned my friends not to tell about our meeting. I went to work for a man named Johnson, but I was so unsettled and torn up about my family that I didn't stay long, though they were fine people. From there I went to Portales to see my brother Audrey. I thought he might have words with my family, and I knew he would not tell my secret. The roads were muddy as the weather had been bad for days, and I sold the old car with plans to go back home on the train. The man who bought the car knew Audrey and told me he was carrying mail and would not be home until sundown. He told me my brother had lost his wife about 6 weeks ago. They had only been married 9 months when she passed away. I walked to his house, which was only 2 miles from town. I arrived there tired and sleepy, so I undressed and went to bed in the front room. I heard Audrey's car as he drove up that evening. It seemed that was the first thing he saw when he opened the door. He stopped with his hand resting on the doorknob. His eyes widened, his mouth flew open as he looked at me. I sat up on the edge of the bed and spoke to him. "Audrey, don't you know me?" I knew it was a mean trick, dropping with no warning, but I wanted to know how Ethel and the boys were doing. I couldn't help but being amused by the look of his face. He stammered out, "You look like Byrd, but my brother's dead. I went to his graveside. Yes, after the funeral, I was at his graveside." I stood up and started to him, but he stepped out the door and slammed it hard behind him, and jumped into his car and sped towards town. I ran to the porch and called after him, but to no avail. I sat on the steps for a moment, wondering whether to laugh or cry. I went back into the house and dressed. Audrey came back later. He had given himself a little time to think. He came towards me and said, "It is really you, isn't it? Byrd, where have you been?" He began to shake me, not sure what to do. "Mama and Papa have been so grieved over you. Why don't you let them know you are alive? Why did you do this to us?" He was answering so many questions and not giving me much time to answer. I was ashamed of what I had done to my family. The plan had been a bad one from beginning to end. It had been a hideous thing to do. I am old now, and time has not dealt gently with me, but I have paid dearly for all my slap-happy ways. The worst punishment of all the horror was the sheer loneliness. Audrey said, "Byrd, I got a letter from Mr. Enzenmaker from Mastermont telling me that you had died. I got a man to deliver my mail, and I went to Caprock after Daddy and Mother. From there we went on to your house. We were too late for the funeral. We went by your grave before we went to see Ethel." My brother hurt I hadn't trusted him with my secret. He told me that he visited Ethel in December because he had gotten word that she collected my life insurance, sold nearly all my stock, and was talking of selling the land. He found she had loaned a large sum of money from her dad. She was planning to go live with her parents. She had rented the land to a man named Raines. I explained to Aubrey that I would have to contact Ethel, for I was in trouble about the insurance. I had forgotten to warn her. But I was furious about my stock and the fact that she had loaned Mr. Hancock a large sum of money which would never be returned. When Aubrey began lecturing me, I felt sorry I hadn't died that day in March. Ethel was in no condition to handle a ranch. Audrey upbraided me for not considering her health before I pulled what he termed as a stupid stunt. He also told me how Pat Anderson had taken my death quite hard, for he had loved me like a brother. "Byrd, your wife is in a bad way. Dr. Jordan said her lungs won't heal from about that flu in March. She needs your help." Audrey didn't bother to hide his disgust for the way I had handled things. In a moment of self-pity, I asked him if he thought I could have done it better with a gun stuck in his back. "I'd never known you to be a coward, though we have not been close in these years," Audrey said in a soft, quiet manner. He was right. I had no reply. I staked out of his house, and it was 12 years before I heard from him again. It was also 12 years before I heard from any of my family, for they quickly forgot the money I had sent to feed and clothe them, and remembered only that I had disgraced them. So when my chips were again down, I had no one to turn to. My troubles were of my own making, and again I was without the love of my family I had tried to help. All this trouble for me resulted from the vengeance of Mrs. Clay Cooper, whose husband and Soons were thieves. The boys had been taught to steal from the time they could ride a horse, and these were the kind of people the self-taught, idolized Fuego Baca defended. The only wrong I had done was not staying on the ranch and minding my own.